really come off the internet anymore. And the fact that actually young people and we are all often online more than we think. Every single digital device nearly uses the internet. But it's not just the fact that the device itself can connect to the internet, it's the way that we interface with the internet, that we don't browse online in a traditional sense of the word. So it's been great. I hope you've been blessed by Nona Jones today. I certainly was. I got a lot from that seminar. But if you're on Facebook, hands up if you are on Facebook, Instagram. Does everybody have a social media account of some sort here? Yeah, absolutely. But if you are on Facebook or any social media account, you're not on Facebook, you're online. And actually, if you go onto Facebook, when you come off Facebook, even though you are not physically online yourself, you are digitally online through your digital presence. So you are online whether or not you are physically using your device. If you can receive a text message on your phone, technically you're online. There would have been a time and a day when the only time you would receive those messages would have been going to your email or having to go and check your phone. But now that I have a phone in my pocket, I am permanently online because I can receive everything that anybody wants to send to me. Instant messaging, email, any other notification system, because you're readily available to respond to anything that comes through. Now, we joked about Alexa not listening to everything we're saying, though technically she is, because if you go online to your Amazon Alexa account, you will find every recording that Alexa has ever made of your voice for the 6 or 7 seconds prior to the command that you give her. Do you know that? If you don't, go and have a look. It's really, really scary. You suddenly hear all of these commands: Alexa, turn the lounge light on, and all of those things. So they're all recorded. And whilst the government isn't listening into us, we still need to accept the notion that our digital presence is recorded in so many places and in so many ways, and for young people who don't know how to navigate that safely and securely, they may find themselves in a difficult space. So we need to understand how young people are online. I've got a list of statistics. This will be in the notes if you want to download these. Every year, Ofcom do a survey that they publish annually, so these statistics are bang up to date. 1% of 3 to 4-year-olds have a smartphone. 19% of them own their own tablet. 5% of 5 to 7-year-olds have their own smartphone, and 42% have their own tablet. 35%, and I think this statistic is a bit skewed because I'm going to tell you why in a minute. 35% of 8 to 11s have a smartphone, 47% have a tablet. Now, I think that statistic is the wrong age bracket. I think they really need to be testing 11-year-olds individually, 10, 11-year-olds, because that's that year 6 moment when more kids than ever, and depending on how you parented, they are given a smartphone because they're preparing for high school. And that is the time generally when parents will say, yes, because you'll see why in a minute these statistics jump right up. So from 35% having a smartphone at 8 to 11, 83% of 12 to 15-year-olds have a smartphone. 50% have their own tablet. So across the age spectrum that we've got, we already see that children from an early age are exposed to digital media and online life. A life where they are, as we said, not just going online when they actively access their phone, but they will have some sort of a digital presence which is active when they're not going online actively themselves. Across the age spectrum, the Ofcom survey, and I can't quite believe this, said that they spend between 9 and 21 hours a week online. And the reason why I can't quite believe that is because I'm aware that even though I've set my daughter app limits, I'm aware that she uses online facilities far more than I think that represents. And not only that, but we need to remember that we've not even begun to talk about the 45 hours that they might watch TV for. And then we've already aware, if you're on trend and you're looking around at the news lately, you will see that actually the consummation of terrestrial broadcast media is diminishing and the uptake of online streaming media is increasing. So when we're talking about them watching TV, we might be talking about them accessing Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever other streaming service they have. So here's where we get to the scarier stuff. 1% of 3 to 4-year-olds have a social media profile. Does anybody know a 3-year-old who has a social media profile in here? Who knows where that is? I mean, that's kind of scary stuff, and we won't even begin to think about the age limits there. 4% of 5 to 7-year-olds have a social media profile. 18% of 8 to 11-year-olds have a social media profile. So that's nearly 1 in 5. So for every 5 kids in your youth, or in your children's group, let alone your youth group, for every 5 kids, one of them is probably on Facebook. 70% of 12 to 15-year-olds have a social media profile. And that's where that age bracket starts to blur, because we understand that the minimum age for a Facebook profile would be 13, and then we'll look at the other age groups later on as well. So this just proves that we need to reconsider what it means to be online. That it is not a distinct activity that we engage with and then we disengage with. Young people who have anything like a smartphone, a tablet, any sort of internet-capable device, and certainly if they have a social media profile, we need to know that their life online is far more than the time that they spend using their phones to access it. And so we realise that actually that in itself is amazing for them in their experience. It's amazing for them in the ways that they can connect. It's brilliant that they feel like this is a tool that they can use. But equally, we need to understand that there are risks. So we're not here to say the one thing about safeguarding, and the message that often comes out, which is not true, is that we're not here to kill the joy. More often than not, we get people who sort of bemoan sometimes the advice that we give on helplines because it feels restrictive, but if anything, we want to enable just safely in our culture that we have. So what are the issues? What are the safety issues in our online life? Let me tell you that 1 in 5, 12 to 15-year-olds have reported or experienced some sort of bullying online, which can cross over in the face-to-face. So bullying is the first and foremost experience of the risks of online life for young people. Now, how does bullying happen? Well, if it was, and I feel far too young to be saying back in my day, but back in my day, if bullying happened, it was in person. It was in a secluded spot in the school. It was on the way home when you were isolated and you were out of reach of the teachers or any sort of authority figure. Bullying happened in the changing rooms in school when you were doing sports and PE or whatever else that might have been. The thing is, with bullying and online safety, is the fact that there is now no longer any restricted space for you to be able to take that opportunity. So what used to happen opportunistically now happens almost. There is never a time when the online space isn't available to somebody who wants to bully someone else. Now that can be through direct messaging, simply through the medium of text messaging. It can be through trolling. A lot of young people want to express themselves, and especially those who have their own mental health needs and those who feel insecure about themselves, you would think that they would be the least active online, but actually they seek meaning through posting their own YouTube videos and putting on their social media profiles the things that they think about and that they are going through. And that they do that as a desperate attempt to reach out to people who will empathise with them. So part of my work used to be working in secondary schools with behaviour issue children and family support alongside my church work as well. And I used to support one girl who literally would pour her heart out on YouTube videos. And then she would broadcast those videos to anybody and everybody that she knew. And whilst there would have been some mutual support from her friends, there was a barrage of abuse that would come to her in the comment section that she would then have to come into school with and work through with the counsellor and everything else. But she was desperate to reach out. So trolling, making nasty comments, and let's face it, sadly, that is not limited to the world of young people. Unfortunately, that just goes way beyond into the rest of society as well. Here's another way that you're online, and we didn't mention it earlier, but online gaming. And that is another forum and space through which our young people are open to bullying online. And how does that happen? You don't really do that through direct messaging online. You can't necessarily do that so easily through a console, a games console pad. But actually it comes through the headset that you wear when you're playing Call of Duty or Halo or whatever other game that is relevant for our young people today. And the people that they are connecting with, there is no filter. There are no moderators upon those multiplayer games that have platforms where all sorts of people throughout the world are connecting online. And so the abuse that can come through simply through the headphones that your kids are wearing. There are ways in which we can navigate that, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but bullying is a real risk about online activity. Now let me clarify what bullying means for starters. It is not sharing a contradictory opinion to something that somebody shares. Bullying has to be really repetitive attempts by the perpetrator to demean and instill fear into their victim. It is the power that they want to hold over that, which requires more than just a one-off encounter disagreement. So we do need to be careful about how we respond to those things. The other issue about being online, the safety issues that are there, is inappropriate content. If you're not aware of how easy it is to access pornography online, you probably have been living in a deserted island. It is a couple of clicks away. It is a Google search away to do that. As I said, my daughter's 11, and it was several years ago when my wife decided to go out independently to go and buy her own mobile phone, and she got a tablet deal with it without consulting me whatsoever, and she ended up with an Android device, which, she'll make mistakes. So, she ended up with this cheap Lenovo tablet to go along with it. And I had generally set most of our parental settings around on the devices, on the televisions, on the accounts. And it just so happened I hadn't gotten around to setting the parental settings on her tablet. And our daughter, who was probably about 6 or 7 at the time, she had been on Google and gone off it. We hadn't even really noticed it so much. And then Alison, my wife, found the tablet tucked underneath the bedside. And she didn't know how it got there. And she opened it up, and onto a Google page were images of naked men. She was trying to search something to do with baking or whatever else that was. And she had accidentally auto-filled whatever it was or pressed onto this, and she had then been so frightened of it that she closed the tablet, shoved it under the bed as though it didn't exist. And it must have been a couple of weeks, because Alison doesn't really use a tablet that much, before we found that. And that was just a couple of sentences away, or a couple of words away from a Google search, all because I hadn't set a parental filter. All because I hadn't taken an extra step. And all because she had a tablet with her that she didn't have supervision on when she was probably still too young. Premier itself ran a news report a while back outlining CARE's concern about the inappropriate content that's online for young people to access, and it was also reporting on the progress of the age verification measures that the government were meant to bring in order to access a mainstream porn website, that you would have to put in something like passport details, credit card details, or anything else like that. And I was really excited by this possible step, that even though it wasn't going to address half of the issues of independent websites and how they were going to regulate that, at least it was a step for our government to do so. And sadly, about 2 weeks after the Premier published that news piece, the government failed to make any progress on that, and they completely dropped the idea of age verification on websites. So we can see that, sadly, just inappropriate content is a step away from anybody who's online, and especially young people, whether that's accidental or whether that is intentional for the young person. If you want to use Amazon Prime's video, they, unlike Netflix, which has a kids channel separately, whilst you can go to family content on Amazon Prime, if you just scroll through the list of videos that were available on their newly released section, you will have to scroll past a number of pornographic 18-rated films to get there. So the moment your young person is just giving access to Amazon Prime without any sort of parental digital pin or whatever else that might be, they are at risk of simply accessing inappropriate content. And then there is the other issue of sexting, which comes along with this as well. And working in secondary schools, I can tell you that the issues of sexting that I had to deal with were not limited to years 9, 10 and 11, but actually years 7 and 8, young girls were being approached by other boys to request images of themselves with naked tops and all sorts of things. And so sexting has become a real issue. And actually, even the request over a message has stopped being one of the ways in which that is done now. In my daughter's school, one of her friends had to go to the teacher because she had an iPhone and somebody airdropped her a naked picture. And that wasn't even a message, that wasn't even requested, that wasn't even over a text message version. This was just airdrop. Now, airdrop is one of those things that a few years ago Apple had an issue with on train platforms for adults and commuters. People were airdropping images into other people's phones because the default setting on airdrop was open contact. So you didn't have to be in contact in the phone. Now, the default setting back for AirDrop means that, for Apple at least, is that it is closed to contacts. So it can only be people who are already on your phone that can AirDrop to you with your permission.
Is that only on Apple?
Only on Apple at the moment, yeah. So I don't know what Android has in terms of there, but it will be something, yeah, it's something similar. And so actually, you know, your child can go onto AirDrop. And we just have to imagine the scenario. A young person at school has a friend, a legitimate friend, and they want to share something together. And they go, well, I can go onto AirDrop. Well, you're not in my phone yet. Well, let me just turn my thing to open access, and so we'll do that. And then they don't turn it back. And there's a whole risk there that they can receive images without even being given the option to receive them, as we would maybe with other ways that they do sexting there too. So, in some cases, a child doesn't need to be online. They just need to have a phone in their pocket. And there is a risk there for inappropriate content. As we think about that image of sexting, in that sense, or the issue of sexting there, we need to move on to the idea of grooming, which is moving on from that sort of peer sexting issue that goes on. So I'm going to quote the Ofcom study again. One of the specific areas of concern with regard to internet use is that of talking to strangers. Around 1 in 5 12 to 15-year-olds, 22% of respondents who opted to answer the question said they had been contacted online by someone they didn't know. And 1 in 10, 9%, said they had seen something of a sexual nature that made them feel uncomfortable. Now, I think 22% is too low, and let me tell you why. I did 4 years' worth of research with Year 8 year groups, the whole year group in Year 8. So in the time, 4 years, I was working with 2 different high schools, so 1 year in my first one and 3 years with the second school. And every Year 8 cohort I surveyed, from between 24 and 33% of them were willing to add people onto their social media contacts that they'd never met before. And all you need to do on the social media contact is have an email address and make up a name, steal a picture, and there you go. And what's worrying about that is that it says, just under an hour for online groomers to build a relationship where somebody is willing to meet with them. Just under an hour. As of January 2018, over 1,300 cases of sexual communication with a child have been recorded with girls aged between 12 and 15, and they are the most likely to be targeted. And for the Metropolitan Police, reported cases of this nature of communication have risen by 700%. It's massive, isn't it? Time's running out, we've got about sort of 9 minutes left. The other, I think, risk, so we've got bullying, and we've got inappropriate content, and then we've got grooming. And then we have really, for me, I think one of the bigger issues that I think actually we're going to deal with more than anything else as church, even though the other issues are there. The other issue for me is just health and well-being, that I think is a risk. Do you know, mental health referrals have risen so much since the online digital age has increased over the last decade. In 2017 to 18, referrals for the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service topped 264,000 in England and Wales. Just under 60,000 of those didn't meet the criteria for specialist services. And that's not surprising when you consider the data that we've just gone through, and we're having to do such a small snapshot into that. But you see, in my opinion, when you consider the time that we had, and Nona touched on it, that you know, we have 168 hours in our week. If you sleep 56 of those hours, which is hopeful, you're left with 112. If you're a young person, you'll spend 35 of those in lessons, and then 77 hours left, not including out-of-school activities and homework. And then if you do spend 21 hours online, depending on what they say with that with Ofcom as to how they define that, if you then spend 45 hours watching television, then whatever time your parents have, which are online in conflict with that, you will find that you've probably got less than 15 hours left to make a meaningful relationship with your family members. Now, to me, as a parent, which is why I'm interested in it, I know that I cannot build a meaningful relationship with my daughter in 15 hours a week. A meaningful contact. It has to be more, doesn't it? And I think that's one of the biggest issues with our health and well-being with our young people, and the issue of mental health and why it's on so massively on the rise. It's not necessarily the bullying, although that is an issue. It is certainly grooming, but that's not, I don't think that's the main reason for mental health. I think it's simply the lack of solid relationships that we are building with our young people. So we've got a few risks there that we need to consider. And I want to move on very quickly to responding together. That's our thing really with our mission with 31A. We don't simply want you to hear a policy and, well, there you go away with it. We want to do it together. We want to equip you to have the best policy and the best practice, but we also want to walk through that journey with you, which is why the helpline is there 24 hours a day. So the first thing that I want to encourage you to do and to think about, and where the resource will be on the webpage for you there as well, is to think about your church policy. Youth leaders, you can be the drivers of this policy. Don't let policy simply be created by the church board or the pastors or the senior leaders. You're the guys on the ground who should know where this policy really hits forward. You're the guys who can work with this. So think about your policy. Consider the social media forums that you use for young people and what your policy says to that. It needs to be age appropriate. And so sadly, 11s and 12-year-olds are going to be reasonably excluded from the main platforms of social media if we have the integrity to say you shouldn't be on them until the age says. 13 plus for Facebook and Instagram. Here's the other thing that we get asked a huge amount on the helpline. Can we set up a WhatsApp group for our young people? No, you cannot, because WhatsApp in the EU is 16 plus. And so simply by setting up a WhatsApp group and saying, kids, come onto a WhatsApp group, you're breaking the law. You're encouraging your children to break the law. I'm sorry, that's some of you are going to have to take communion knowing that tomorrow. In doing so. WhatsApp is no good. Snapchat is a big no-no. Why? Because it deletes the messages straight away. And actually what we found, and if you've got contacts in the app development world, please come speak to us. Please speak to myself or Peter. We would love to find an organisation that developed a church-friendly app that actually enabled accountable communication with young people. Because there is nothing out there that meets all of our criteria for safer communication. Because then you think about Facebook. Facebook's probably the best way to do it. I'm not aware of Instagram, so you might be able to educate me on that. But Facebook is the one forum where you can actually have moderators. Now you can do that in different ways. You can moderate by screening all of the input through your forum for your youth group. Or you can just let it go on, but if you're a moderator on there, you can delete content or challenge content, and you can do that too. So you need to set your social media forum policy. What are we going to use? What restrictions do we have with the law? Communicating with young people is not something that you can do risk-free. So we need to think about how we communicate, what time limits there are to communicate. If you are going to be able to directly message young people through a work phone or something like that, you need to set your time limits in terms of what time in the day is that appropriate. It isn't really appropriate to communicate with a young person after 10 o'clock at night. That's just interrupting their own potential sleep and everything else. Thinking about keeping messages to being factual and organisational, trying not to stray into a one-to-one conversation which can go into all sorts of places. The illustration I use when we think about communicating with young people is if your safeguarding policy would say, we really don't encourage youth leaders to meet with our young person one-to-one in a room on their own when there's nobody else around. If that's what we are saying in the real person, then we're also going to say that in the digital person, because one-to-one messaging is the digital equivalent of being in a room on your own with a young person where nobody can see. And there are real risks there as well. I'm not saying you can mitigate all of these risks, but we can put accountability into place. Think about your policy. Time is flying on. Acceptable use policies. We need to think about the acceptable use policy where schools and workplaces have them as well. So if you go into a school or workplace, you're going to have a bring your own device policy, and then you're going to have a policy for using the school devices too. Why not churches? Why not churches where if we are allowing young people and adults to access our internet capabilities, why not have an access and acceptable use policy so that you have something to rely on when it goes wrong? I had to shut down the men's WhatsApp group for a week as punishment because they were being disrespectful to one another. But we have a policy to rely upon that for where we can actually remove someone from a group who's being abusive, so we can go back to a paper piece that we sign and say, "But you agreed to this. You agreed to behave." Okay, really quickly, education. Churches and youth groups are in a prime place to support young people and parents in being aware of the dangers. And this is where I find that you've got so many stakeholders in this whole realm of things. You've got the church, you've got the youth leaders, you've got the kids themselves, and then you've got the parents. Where do we start in all of this journey of trying to get people safe online? At home, I think about it, we've got amazing sound guys here today, but all of their sound is different. So if I'm altering the sound at my church, not only do I have the main volume on the desk, then I've got the individual volume for the channel, and then I've got the fallback volumes which are individual to them, but then on my guitar I've got a volume on there, and then on the fallback monitor there's a volume on there. There's volumes everywhere to have the setting of what we go. It's really hard work, isn't it, to try and get that right. So with a home device and with educating our families at church, we really need to identify the techie people in our church who can advise parents. You're not going to get this all done in a sermon, but get someone who's techie to show a parent how to set the router settings. But it's not just the router, it's the parental pin for the BBC iPlayer, it's the Amazon Prime, it's for Netflix. It's not just the parental pins onto those video systems, but it's actually then every iPad, every tablet that you've got in your household, not just a tablet, but the individual sites that are going on. Google search, there's a volume everywhere for all of your digital safety stuff that you're trying to do. So we need to be able to educate. Now, church leaders, even youth leaders, you're not necessarily equipped for that. But I guarantee you've got geeks in your church who will happily serve in this way. I think find 4 or 5 people in your church who just know how to do these things. Set up a parent workshop for a day. Just do something which will engage with the whole family, where we can work together when we respond to that. Let's have a very quick look at responding to concerns. I've got like 1 minute left. I don't think they have a card for 1 minute at the back. Responding to concerns. There are sort of 3 things really to be aware of. Number 1, is the online activity that the concern is about illegal? If it's illegal, report it to the police. Okay? If it's illegal, report it to the police. Is it inappropriate content, or is it illegal content that somebody else is looking at? If so, this is on our flowchart, so don't worry too much about trying to take notes. If it's inappropriate content, report it to the Internet Watch Foundation. Okay, they will keep a database on that. Is it something where it is sexual or grooming in nature? Report it to CEOP, C-E-O-P, the Child Exploitation Online Protection Centre. So you can report it to them, and you can move it forward into getting it reported to them directly. You can encourage the family to report it to them, and you can take advice on that from CEOP. Our helpline is there, so when you come with an online concern, you can give us a call on our helpline, and we will give you the best guidance and advice in order to move you forward with that. Never delete content on the phone that you see that is concerning. Never ever delete it. Take screenshots of it, then delete it. Whatever you do, don't just say delete it and get rid of it. Never delete content. It needs to be kept for evidence for the police if you're going to get them involved into that. Quick actions can help preserve evidence for that there as well. If a young person is concerned, make sure that on your forums for your social media, make sure you have a CEOP reporting page and a button there as well. Make sure that you can get that message through to the young people there. Together, only together can we combat those risks that are presented in their online digital life. As 31A, we are here to support you with that mission and message. So if you want to come talk to us, because I've run out of time, come talk to us on the stand in the break. If you want some personal advice in terms of actually how to do settings, I'll take you through that as well. If you want to talk about your youth ministry and how you can manage those issues there, come talk to us, because we want to bless you with that. I'm out of time. Thank you very much. God bless you.